Right after the Second World War, Russia occupied many of the Eastern European countries in a different sense of the word, not militarily, but rather psychologically and politically, creating an iron-like curtain no one could climb. We first hear the term Iron Curtain during Winston Churchill's speech in Westminster College in 1946. In his speech, he says, and I quote, "From Szczecin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe." End of quote. While doing research for my speech, I learned a great deal more from historical standpoint than I ever knew before, as history was altered to fit the times when I attended school in Poland. Today, I will share my personal experiences of what it was like to grow up in a communistic regime. I was born in the early 70s to what was considered middle-class working family, but I have blue blood in my veins of Polish aristocracy, so my family made the so-called watch list. My maternal grandparents had vast acres of land and farm, all of which was given away to the state because personal ownership was not allowed. My paternal grandparents owned several buildings in a small town and a tiny little palace-like house in the heart of Poland. They were forced to sign it over to the state because every person in Poland needed to share it. It was called the law of equality. In the meantime, my parents and I lived in a 2-room apartment on the second floor. We shared it with my grandma, my uncle, his wife, and the twin daughters. When my parents got married in 1972, they got their name on the wait list to get an apartment. They waited for 9 years. They got their own place in 1981. Their next trouble was to go and purchase furniture for that apartment. In order to do that, my mom had to go bright and early every morning for 30 days to the furniture store, had to sign a piece of paper that said that she's capable of paying for it and that she still wanted it. My school years were somewhat intense. There was a high standard of education as we were racing to surpass the evil capitalists. The classes were not more than 15 students, we were all in uniform, and there was no private schools. Russian was the only language that you were allowed to learn other than Polish. Our history teachers were not allowed to speak of any anti-Soviet material. They couldn't talk about the events in Katyn that happened during the Second World War, where 20,000 Polish soldiers got slaughtered by the Soviets. Nor could they talk about the war between Poland and Russia in the 1920s. Our fridge was never full. Food was ration based on family size, and you would get your food stamps every month. I remember empty grocery shelves, even though there were food stamps in our hands. And I remember me and my grandma going from a store to store looking for food. But overall, we were in luck, because my great-grandmother lived in the country. It was a 4-hour drive each weekend to go and get vegetables and eggs. We also used to go to local farms to pick our fruits and veggies so we can put them in jars and keep them for the winter. That way we didn't have to rely on the stores. In the early days of 1981, strange things started to happen in our apartment. My dad would be gone a lot. Our pantry contained boxes of paper rather than food. There was increased presence of police and the military on the streets. My parents started speaking of freedom and independence. This was also the first time I learned about Soviet secret police and the treatment of Polish citizens. I elected to join a church group only because the priest who was leading it would allow us to listen to Radio Free Europe. It was our only avenue to listen to news from outside our borders. My life forever changed at 2 a.m. on the 13th of December 1981. The military broke into our apartment, dragged my dad out because Polish government implemented martial law. He was one of the first people who got arrested, only 2 hours into law going into effect. My dad was in prison for over 2 weeks. We had no knowledge or information about him, his whereabouts, or if he was alive or dead. The very same day, my mother was burning the papers from the pantry in the tub of our bathroom. She also pulled me aside and told me what to say and what not to say in case I get questioned by the KGB. I could hear the fear in her voice, and I definitely saw the fear in her eyes. There were tanks on the streets, and tear gas was in the air. At 9 years old, I realized that I was living in a cage. And later on, I was also told the reason why my dad got arrested so early into the martial law implementation was because he was one of the top Solidarity leaders. The martial law lasted a couple of years. By the mid-80s, it became evident we were heading for a communistic collapse. Censorship started to change. In 1987, Ronald Reagan delivered "Tear down that wall, Mr. Gorbachev" speech, and hope entered our hearts again. The wall came down 2 years later. That's again a milestone for me, as my life changed again because the freedom bells were ringing across my country in all of the churches. This was the time when I finally started to learn English and I was able to travel abroad. Living behind Iron Curtain taught me a great deal. It taught me how to be a patriot, not to take things for granted, what freedom of expression really means, that nothing is given and everything is earned. I would not change living in Poland for anything. It gave me great life experiences which make me somewhat unique. And I hope one day, when I retire, I get to go back and grow old in the country I love.